The idea behind making Que Hacer, which means what is to be done, which is a takeoff from a pamphlet that Lenin wrote by that title, and previously a pamphlet that was written by a 19th century Russian revolutionary named Chernyshevsky. Anyway, that was the origin, and the idea was to find a political event of great significance and construct a feature-like film around it. And the event in Que Hacer that was the leitmotif of the film was the presidential election of Chile in September of 1970, in which one of the three candidates was Dr. Salvador Allende, who represented 5 political parties on the left. It was called the Unidad Popular, or the Popular Unity Front, of almost the whole Chilean left. I say almost the whole because the ultra-left, or the MIR, the revolutionary movement, did not support the election. They didn't oppose Allende, but they thought elections weren't the way that the workers and peasants gained power. Anyway, we set out to construct a story in and around the election of the president without knowing who was going to win. And we did this as a joint U.S.-Chilean co-production. That is, Raul Ruiz was a Chilean director, and Dario Pulgar was one of the producers. There were some Chilean financing. The director of photography was Gustavo Moris, who was an Argentine. And there was a Chilean sound man, Chilean electricians, and actors, of course. And then there were American actors, and the directors, myself, Nina Serrano, and the other co-producer, Jim Beckett. So we went down there and we rented a house, a big house, in a very conservative, well, the only wealthy districts were, of course, conservative in Chile, because politics totally follows class lines. And so we rented this big house. We put all the actors and crew and technicians in. And we set out to make this film, which wasn't scripted. That is, we had a storyline. And we knew scene by scene what was supposed to happen. But before each scene, we would talk it through, and then we would script it, give the script to the actors, and they would do the scene. And it was fascinating because my experience was as a documentary director. Nina Serrano's was as a theater director, and Raul Ruiz was sort of as an independent feature filmmaker who had done 1 or 2 films in Chile. They were rather crude. Anyway, we all came together, and in some crazy way, on an extremely low budget, we managed to finish this film. And the film involved essentially a CIA or spy story, the revolutionary movement, the Unidad Popular, and everything else that we could find in Chile. And then, of course, it was brought together, in a sense, as a musical by Country Joe McDonald of Country Joe and the Fish. So it was a weird film in which we stole ideas from Bertolt Brecht and from Jean-Luc Godard, who was at that time a very important innovator in film, or revolutionary film. And Joe McDonald functioned as kind of a Brechtian Greek chorus, as Brechtian - Greek chorus. So he would comment on the story, give the moral of the story in song. And in addition, what we did was we wove documentary footage into the feature film, so that you will see in Que Hacer fights that occurred on the street. And these were real fights between right-wingers and communists. And you'll know they're real because punches never land on the face. And men pull women by the hair and drag them through the street, and people kick at each other. And it's the chaos, the anarchy of a real street fight, rather than the choreographed fights that you see in Hollywood films, where every punch lands and you hear the appropriate sound, whereas in real fights, people who hit each other in the face usually break their knuckles, or if they connect in the mouth, they get a very serious infection in their hands. Things you don't read about or see in Hollywood films. So we filmed real demonstrations of hundreds of thousands of people turning out to support Allende. And we mixed them in. And we sent the characters in to these scenes. So they appear in the middle of these demonstrations as if they were real characters. And indeed, some of them were. Some of them were political activists. Some of them were Communist Party members or belonged to other political groupings in Chile. And so then we, in the editing, we mixed it all together and came up with a very unusual feature film that won a whole bunch of prizes later on. But we never got the money to sort of publicize it in a proper way. And it was a cultural melange, a mixture between the Chileans and the Americans. And people will see for themselves how it worked. Well, the two lead American characters, one of whom is a CIA type agent or officer who attempts to, and successfully does, assassinate a revolutionary priest in a mining town in northern Chile. And the woman he lusts after and who he also uses to gain access to his victim is a Peace Corps volunteer. These are what I would call archetype characters rather than real-life characters. They really weren't modeled on any people that any of us knew. They were rather taken from a general pastiche, all right, of the culture of the times. I don't know that the CIA was actually provided by the Peace Corps with any help. I have no evidence to back that up. But it might as well, in a fiction film, you can throw that in, since he was never really identified as CIA in the film. And the Peace Corps actually didn't play a direct role in it, that he lured her. And one of the Peace Corps volunteers in the film, Elizabeth Farnsworth, is now, of course, a news commentator on the Lehrer Hour. But that's where she got her television start. And she's a terrific actress, by the way, and has a fabulous minor role that she plays as a Peace Corps volunteer. But the idea of the villain as the American agent and his unwitting accomplice, who later, of course, regrets deeply what she did, not knowing, the innocent American, right, and the malicious American. This was a time, by the way, that it was a little after Graham Greene had written The Quiet American and Burdick had written The Ugly American. And so we were playing with these characters as well when we cast these roles. Well, there's scenes in Que Hacer that one could have played in Caracas, Venezuela in 2002 or 2004 of very well-dressed upper-class women. They were extremely adamant in promoting their candidate. In Chile at that time it was Alessandri, who was the extreme right-wing candidate and who didn't even bother to campaign. He would go on television and sing tangos, right? He didn't even bother to address himself to the issues. Everybody knew that he was for property and against workers and poor people. And he stood for dignity, strength, power, and wealth. These same women, well, they could have been the same women, showed up later in Venezuela saying the same basic slogans. Now, in one of the scenes we were filming, for some reason I was interviewing some of these women, and one of them decided that I was a communist. And she said, "You're asking too many provocative questions. You must be a communist." And she took her handbag and slammed me over the head with it. And other women then began to wail in. And luckily, the cameraman, Gustavo Morris, was a great big strapping fellow who weighed 260 pounds, and he let out a mighty roar and sort of scared them for a moment, and we sort of managed our escape. But here are these women who had no interest in free speech, no interest in democracy. All they were saying was that Allende was a communist, he was identified with Cuba and the Soviet Union, and anything that was necessary to get rid of him had to be done. Now, at the time, the pots and pans demonstration was the thing that hurt Allende very deeply toward the end, certainly toward the end of his short rule when these same women began to bang their pots and pans in demonstrations in the streets as if there was not enough food. Well, as somebody observed at the time, this was the first time some of them had ever touched their pots and pans, which previously were only used by servants. Again, in Venezuela, 30 plus years later, we have the same demonstrations, the same slogans, and ladies who were lookalikes for the ones we found in Chile back in 1970. There was, in 1970, all Americans in Chile were suspected of being CIA agents. And some of them actually were. The CIA indeed had a huge number of agents throughout the country. But there were also Mormons who were proselytizing in small towns and northern villages. And they were, of course, clearly identifiable by the way they dressed and the way they looked, and the fact that they had Bibles in their hands and other literature they were handing out. But when we filmed, part of the film Que Hacer was filmed in the mining city of Copiapó in the north of the country. And when we got to Copiapó, shortly after we had started filming, one day we came out and saw all of our vehicles had their tires slashed, which made them inoperative. And on the radio, we had heard from a local resident who was sympathetic to us and knew us, that the mayor of the town, a member of the Socialist Party of Copiapó, had denounced us as CIA agents. And so I didn't know what to do. And our Chilean socialist friends went back to Santiago to consult, leaving the Americans all alone. And I went to the miners' union in Copiapó and asked them for help, saying that we had made films in Cuba and the Cubans had taught us about solidarity, and we expected the same from our comrades in Chile. And they looked at us as if we were crazy, right? And finally, I didn't know what to do, so I went to the mayor's house and I knocked on the door. And his wife answered, and I said, "You tell the mayor to come out and see me." "Well, he's not home right now." And of course, we could see him in the background. He was home. And I said, "Well, you tell the mayor that he has to retract everything that he said about us. It's a lie, and he knows it's a lie. And from now on, we're going to film in this town, and he should check with Dr. Allende himself as to our credentials." I didn't know, of course, Allende would even answer the phone. But anyway, that happened, and the tire slashings thankfully stopped. But it was rather a traumatic experience, and it cost us a couple of days of production. Okay. There's one other memorable thing, which was Country Joe says, "I can't figure out this country. I got to figure it out." And he says, "What should I do?" And somebody says, "Why don't you just go spend the night up there on the mountaintop and see what comes to you, right? Take your guitar up there and your poncho and some water." And Joe trudged up the mountain. And in the morning he came down and he didn't look too comfortable. And so I said, "So what did you discover?" He says, "I discovered it's damn cold up there." Anyway, I thought that was interesting. There's a song in there. I went up to a mountaintop to figure out what was going on, and I found out it was cold on the top of the mountain. That's how the song begins.